I am Alara Finch, and I am 37 years old. The morning I left for my business trip, nothing felt dramatic. That's the cruel part about betrayal. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or warning signs. It slips into ordinary moments, disguises itself as routine, smiles at you from across the kitchen table, and waits until your back is turned. That morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror adjusting my blazer, rehearsing figures in my head, mentally preparing for the biggest deal of my career. My husband, Marcus Hale, leaned against the doorframe watching me the way he always did. Quiet, unreadable, familiar enough that I stopped questioning what I saw and what I didn't. Before we continue, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Stories like this reach people who know what it means to trust deeply and lose suddenly, and your support helps these stories find those who need them. Marcus offered to drive me to the airport. He insisted, actually, even though I told him I could call a ride. He said he wanted a few extra minutes with me. At the time, I thought it was sweet. Looking back, I wonder if he needed to make sure I really left. We drove mostly in silence, the city still half asleep, traffic lights blinking yellow like they were undecided about the day ahead. At the curb, he hugged me longer than usual. His hands lingered on my back, tight enough to feel almost desperate. 10 days, I said lightly. Try not to miss me too much. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll be right here. I didn't know then how carefully chosen those words were. The flight was long, exhausting, and productive. Zurich greeted me with steel skies and ruthless efficiency. My schedule was packed from the moment I landed. Meetings, negotiations, late dinners where everyone pretended not to be calculating everyone else's worth. I loved it. Work had always been the one place where things made sense. Effort led to results. Preparation mattered. Truth was documented. Nothing hid behind emotion. Marcus texted the first night. Hope you landed safe. House feels quiet without you. I replied with a photo of my hotel window and a heart emoji. That was the last message that felt normal. As the days passed, his calls became shorter. Sometimes he wouldn't answer at all. When I asked, he said he was busy, tired, overwhelmed. I told myself that marriage meant trusting even when it felt uncomfortable. I told myself not to become one of those women who interrogate silence. I had no idea silence was already answering me. On the 6th day, I was in the middle of a presentation when my phone buzzed. I ignored it at first. Then it buzzed again. And again. I glanced down and saw my bank's number. My stomach tightened, not with fear but irritation. I stepped out of the room and answered, already preparing to ask them to call back later. Mrs. Finch, the woman on the line said carefully, we need to confirm 2 asset transfers that were finalized yesterday. I leaned against the wall, pen still in my hand. What kind of transfers? Vehicle title transfers. Both cars registered under your name. For a moment, I thought this was a mistake. A misunderstanding. Something clerical that would resolve itself with one explanation. That can't be right, I said calmly. I'm overseas. Yes, she replied, but your husband completed the sale. The documents were notarized. Funds were deposited. The hallway suddenly felt very narrow. Which cars? I asked, though I already knew. She listed them anyway. My SUV. My sedan. Both sold. I ended the call without saying goodbye and stood there staring at nothing, my thoughts refusing to line up. I called Marcus immediately. Straight to voicemail. Again. And again. I sent a message asking him to call me. Then another. No reply. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not into panic, but into clarity. People don't sell things that don't belong to them by accident. I left Zurich that night. The flight home felt unreal, like I was traveling back into a life that might no longer exist. I replayed every conversation from the past year, searching for clues. His sudden interest in paperwork. The way he'd asked casual questions about my accounts. The power of attorney forms I'd signed years ago without a second thought. Marriage, after all, is built on shared access. Shared trust. Shared assumptions. When I arrived home, the house greeted me with silence so complete it rang in my ears. The lights were off. The driveway was empty. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, my heels echoing too loudly on the floor. Something was wrong immediately. Not because things were missing, but because they were selectively missing. The couch pillows were gone. His coats were gone. His shoes. His laptop. Drawers stood open like mouths frozen mid-confession. In the bedroom, his side of the closet was stripped bare. Mine was untouched. Almost respectfully so. On the kitchen counter sat a single envelope. I opened it slowly. Elara, I didn't plan for it to happen this way. I've been unhappy for a long time. I need to live honestly, even if it hurts. Please don't try to find me. I hope one day you'll understand. No signature. No apology. No explanation for the theft. I sat at the table for a long time after reading it, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. Not because I was crying, but because my body was processing something my heart hadn't caught up to yet. He didn't just leave. He prepared. Over the next few hours, the truth unfolded in pieces. My email showed password reset attempts. My credit alerts showed activity I hadn't authorized. A neighbor mentioned seeing a woman help Marcus load suitcases into a car days earlier. A woman I had never met. A woman who laughed, apparently, as if she were moving into a future she'd already claimed. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, grief gave way to resolve. I called my lawyer, then my accountant, then my closest friend, Noor. He sold my cars, I said flatly. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Elara, she said gently, that's not the worst part, is it? No, I replied. The worst part is that he thought I wouldn't survive it. I stood in the living room later that afternoon, surrounded by evidence of a life interrupted. Marriage photos stared back at me from the wall, frozen smiles mocking the present. I took them down one by one and placed them face down on the floor. Not in anger. In acknowledgement. The woman I had been before this trip believed in patience. In fixing things quietly. In loyalty even when it cost comfort. The woman standing there now understood something new. Betrayal isn't loud. It's calculated. And it always underestimates the person it leaves behind. And that was only the beginning. The days after Marcus vanished blurred into something shapeless, like time itself had lost structure. Morning came and went without meaning. I moved through the house on instinct alone, touching objects just to confirm they were real. Every room held echoes of a man who had rehearsed his absence long before he committed to it. Cups he once used sat untouched. His favorite chair felt foreign now, like it belonged to a stranger who had briefly borrowed my life. The lawyer's office became my second home. Paper after paper revealed how deliberate Marcus had been. He hadn't just sold my cars. He had been studying my routines, my travel schedule, my blind trust. Power of attorney, signed years earlier after a surgery, had become his key. He knew exactly what he could access and what he couldn't. He also knew what would hurt the most without raising alarms. You're lucky, Daniel said during one meeting, pushing his glasses up his nose as he reviewed another file. He rushed. Lucky wasn't the word I would have chosen, but I understood what he meant. Sloppy criminals leave trails. And Marcus, fueled by ego and urgency, had left plenty. Bank statements painted the next picture. Money withdrawn in irregular patterns. Hotel charges in cities I'd never visited. Jewelry purchases that didn't match my taste. And then, a name that repeated itself often enough to demand attention. Sienna Brooks. The first time I saw it, I felt nothing. The second time, irritation. By the third, a cold recognition settled in. This wasn't a passing affair. This was an investment. I asked Noor to dig quietly. Noor had always been the kind of friend who noticed details others ignored. She didn't ask questions. She just listened and went to work. 3 days later, she called me. I found her, Noor said. I didn't ask how. She's not subtle. Social media is basically a confession. Photos appeared on my screen minutes later. Sienna on a balcony overlooking the ocean. Sienna in designer dresses. Sienna holding champagne glasses beside men who looked proud to be temporary. And there he was, cropped carefully at the edge of one image. Marcus, smiling like a man who believed he had escaped gravity. Something twisted in my chest, not jealousy, but disbelief. He hadn't run away for love. He'd run away to be admired. The realization hit harder than the betrayal itself. Love at least would have implied emotion, confusion, weakness. This was vanity. A midlife resurrection fantasy funded by my labor and my silence. Weeks passed. Marcus didn't call. He didn't write. It was as if he believed disappearance alone could rewrite history. Meanwhile, Sienna flourished online. New city. New car. New captions about choosing happiness and cutting toxic energy. Toxic. I nearly laughed the first time I read that. The court filings began quietly. Asset recovery. Fraud investigation. Unauthorized sales. Each step was clinical, emotionless, almost boring in its precision. Justice, I learned, doesn't rush. It builds. Then one evening the phone rang. Marcus. I let it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. And again. When I finally answered, his voice was smaller than I remembered. "Elara," he said softly, like the name might still unlock something. "Please just hear me out." I didn't respond. "She left," he continued, desperation creeping in. "She took everything." I leaned back against the kitchen counter, the same counter where he'd left that cowardly note. "She convinced me to sell the cars," he said quickly. "Said it was temporary. An investment. She promised." I cut him off. "You sold them because you wanted to." Silence. "You wanted to impress her," I continued calmly. "You wanted to look powerful, generous, untouchable." "That's not." "It is," I said. "And now you're calling because the illusion ended." His breathing grew uneven. "She disappeared, Elara. Closed accounts. Changed numbers. I don't even know her real last name. Of course she hadn't loved him. Women like Sienna didn't attach themselves to men. They attached themselves to opportunity." "You trusted a stranger more than your wife," I said. "Live with that." He showed up at the house 2 nights later. I watched him through the window before opening the door. He looked older, thinner. The confidence that once padded his posture was gone, replaced by something brittle. He stood there holding nothing, not even dignity. "Elara," he said the moment the door opened, relief flooding his face as if my presence alone meant forgiveness. "You have 5 minutes," I replied. Inside, he talked fast. Too fast. Words spilled out like he was afraid silence would expose him. He described Sienna in fragments, how she made him feel young, how she listened, how she encouraged him to take control of his life. He didn't notice how every sentence centered himself. "She said you didn't appreciate me," he added finally. I smiled then. Not kindly. "She was right about one thing," I said. "I didn't appreciate the version of you who needed applause to feel alive." He reached for me. I stepped back. "I loved you," he whispered. "No," I corrected. "You loved how I made your life stable while you chased chaos." He left that night with nothing. The next months were relentless for him. The court froze his accounts. The car sales were reversed on paper, but unrecoverable in reality. Criminal charges followed, not dramatic arrests, just official letters that dismantled his future line by line. His job terminated quietly. His friends stopped returning calls. Even his family distanced themselves, embarrassed by the publicity. As for Sienna, she didn't vanish completely. She resurfaced under investigation in another state. Different man. Same pattern. Luxury paid for by borrowed trust. When the charges caught up to her, she tried to negotiate her way out like everything else in her life. Fraud doesn't negotiate. One afternoon, Daniel called me. "They're asking if you want to pursue maximum damages," he said. I looked around my house, still standing, still mine, even after everything. "Yes," I said simply. Not out of revenge. Out of clarity. Marcus tried to contact me one last time after that. His message was short. I lost everything. I didn't reply. Because what he lost wasn't taken from him. It was returned to its rightful owner, consequences. And while his life collapsed under the weight of his own decisions, mine began to rebuild itself quietly, brick by brick. Not because I was stronger than him, but because I refused to lie to myself about who he had become. Part 3 would be about what happens after the noise dies down. After betrayal finishes screaming. After karma completes its work. When a woman finally chooses herself. Silence returned to my life long before peace did. After the court hearings ended and Marcus stopped calling, there was a strange stillness that settled over everything. Not the kind that soothes you, but the kind that forces you to confront yourself. For years, my identity had been shaped by responsibility, by being dependable, patient, forgiving. Now, stripped of marriage and illusion, I had to decide who I was without constantly holding someone else together. The house changed first. I rearranged furniture, repainted walls, replaced things I had chosen to tolerate rather than love. Every object Marcus had touched felt heavier than it should have, like it carried residue. I boxed up what remained of him, not in anger, but in closure, and donated most of it. Letting go wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. Work followed. I threw myself into it with renewed clarity, not as an escape, but as a reclaiming. Deals closed faster. Decisions came sharper. I no longer second-guessed myself to keep peace waiting at home. Without realizing it, I had been shrinking to make space for a man who mistook comfort for entitlement. One evening, months later, Nora and I sat on my balcony watching the city settle into night. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel honest," I replied. That was the truth. Not happy yet. Not healed. But honest. Marcus, on the other hand, unraveled quietly. News reached me in fragments, not because I sought it, but because consequences have a way of circling back. He tried to contest the rulings and failed. His appeals were denied. Debts followed him like shadows. Jobs didn't last once his history surfaced. Employers don't like unpredictability, and Marcus had become the embodiment of it. Once, I ran into someone who used to call him a friend. "He still talks about you," the man said awkwardly. "Says losing you was the real punishment." I nodded politely and changed the subject. Punishment implies injustice. This was accounting. Sienna's story ended differently, but no less predictably. She took a plea deal. Her charm didn't translate well in courtrooms. The same confidence that dazzled men irritated judges. When everything collapsed, she claimed manipulation, love, desperation. But patterns don't lie, and neither do records. I never met her. I didn't need to. She was just the mirror Marcus chose to admire himself in. The real reckoning came one afternoon when I received a handwritten letter. Marcus. It was longer than his last message. Slower. Less frantic. He wrote about regret. Not the performative kind, but the hollow, exhausted variety. He admitted he had confused being wanted with being loved. That he'd mistaken my stability for control. That running away had cost him everything worth keeping. If I could go back, he wrote, I would have stayed. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. Not to revisit it, but to remember. Forgiveness, I learned, doesn't always require reconciliation. Sometimes it simply means releasing the need to see someone punished beyond what life has already arranged. A year passed. Then another. My life expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated. I traveled again, not for escape, but for joy. I laughed without checking who might feel left out. I built friendships that didn't require emotional negotiation. And eventually, I allowed myself to be seen. Not as a wife, not as a provider, but as a woman who had survived betrayal without becoming bitter. One afternoon, standing in my driveway beside two new cars, both mine, both earned honestly, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for the pain, but for the clarity it forced. Marcus taught me something he never intended to. That loyalty without respect is self-erasure. That love without accountability is illusion. And that a woman who rebuilds herself after betrayal is far more dangerous than one who never falls. I never heard from him again after that letter. I hope he found peace. But I found myself. And if this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters, your story matters, and somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that betrayal does not get the final word.